Well, since I'm not far off making a start on the Nant Gwernol layout, it's about time we look at getting some engines made up. And the first one for the fleet is number 6, Douglas. Hi guys. Now then, there's two parts to this build. The chassis comes from the Bachmann N-Gauge Percy, and the body is a resin print from Westcliff Works. Let's have a look at this beaut first. This is actually the third version released of this kit, and Alec is constantly improving it. As you'll see, it's looking amazing. It's got smokebox interior detail, piping, valves, interior detail, handles, whistle, and that's just the body print. It also comes with a bag of goodies to supplement the main print. This includes the smokebox door, multiple options for the buffer beams, multiple options for the buffers themselves, extensions for the Percy chassis cylinders, piping, and an air pump. Oh boy. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the roof. You do have to be gentle because... yeah, I was going to say you have to be gentle as the roof is a bit fragile. It's not an issue, I will fix that later. Turns out clippers are a safer option than a knife. The other bits to remove are the print supports that you'll find around the finer details such as the handles. Again, be really careful doing this as it won't take much to break something off. I'll quickly fix that roof. The resin does tend to snap clean off, so it's only 2 parts to glue back together. I'll use a healthy amount of super glue and then sand it back later until it's flush with the roof surface. There we go, looks better already. The final thing to look at this point is the underside, where the print supports may have left little dimples. These are super easy to file back flush, so it's well worth spending the 20 seconds or so doing it. The details need to be removed from their supports, such as the smokebox door. Once you've broken it free, it's a good idea to smooth off the outside. And this can now be glued in place. I must now choose between the different sets of parts. I'm going to be building 6 in its current form, so I'll use the buffer beam to match the prototype photos. The back of these pieces will fit flush against the body, so I'm sanding them back a bit to make sure there's a perfect fit. I'm going to use super glue for this build, so a few drops are applied to the body piece, and then the buffer beam is fitted into place. Just like the buffer beams, the correct set of buffers are chosen, comparing them to a photo I took recently. You can see that the rear of the buffer beams have a little tag that fits into a slit on the body. This aids the lining up of parts. And that's a little considerate thing that Westcliff Works do. Again, the buffers are glued in. And for now, that's all I'm adding, as the rest will go on after the main painting stage. Moving on to the chassis, and this needs to be modified with the kit parts, and completely painted up, so the first thing to do is remove in the screws from below. Which will let you pull out the chassis clear of the body, which is now passed on to the younger assistant to deal with. And the chassis is test fitted with the main body. It may need a little bit of fettling for a perfect fit, but mine pretty much slot in first time. Though it is a tight fit. In fact, that's how I'll leave it. No need to bolt them together, which is nice. So the cylinder extension pieces are glued on. Not really any magic to this, just try to get them level. Oh, at this point I have decided to add additional detail to the body. And this is 0.4 by 0.75 strip styrene, which I cut into little bits and then bent them up. And they make for nice little lamp brackets. On the back there's 3 brackets, but I'm only adding a 2 at the bottom as a lamp will go at the top, eventually. The other thing is 2mm rod. By cutting off a disc from the strip of rod, you can make a roughly mild representation of that thing. Something to do with the pipes. Air pipes. Something to do with the pipes. I should know, I have worked on this engine. Oh look, it's time for cotton buds already, and you can see how handy they are as a handle with things like this. Back on the chassis, and I've pulled the wheel sets out from the main block, and I'm now adding masking tape over sensitive parts such as the pickups. They are fragile and this will save scrubbing them later, and risk snapping them off. A strip of tape along the bottom will protect the inner gubbins from the overspray. The model first gets a spray of grey car primer. It's really important to try and get a good coverage all over. And on a detailed model like this, it's easy to miss the odd corner if you don't hit it correctly. So I'm only giving it light sprays at a time to minimise the risk of paint runs. And same goes for the chassis. I'm only really hitting what you will actually see, which isn't a huge amount actually. The colour I've chosen for 6 is Army Painter's Crystal Blue. This is actually the colour I used on the Skarloey Open coach, but it's extremely close when you compare the two in photos. So the airbrush is fired up and 6 is given a first, very light misting. This first misting will let me check how viscous the mixture is. A close inspection of the coat and I've given it the all clear for a full paint. I've probably given it about 3 good coats, and since it's acrylic, I super dry each coat with a hairdryer before applying the next. I now have one permanently under the workbench, as it comes in common practice with these builds now. It really helps if I've got a lack of time, which I do all the time. The chassis block and wheels are now painted with matte black, and then can go back together. Now I forgot to do it at this point, but by painting the bottom half of the slide bar and crosshead, you can get a good representation of the valve gear on 6. I'll do that later. I've left the blue top coat to cure for a day, and now I'm moving on to the black parts, such as the buffers and frame. I'm trying to mask it off as good as I can, but due to the small details close to the paint joint, I'll no doubt get a bit of paint creeping under the tape where it's not really fully stuck down. So here's all the blue parts masked off, ready for the black. This is the black acrylic primer, which gives a really dark black finish, which will be ideal for the painted parts of number 6, such as the buffer beams. This will get 2 or 3 coats to fully cover the blue below it, and then I'll leave it to dry for a day or so, before moving on. So now, I'm masking off the black painted shiny bits, which leaves the chimney, smoke box and the support below it. This then gets a coat of black acrylic poster paint that I use for weathering, and this is a much lighter matte black. It will give a subtle contrast between the two types. When I apply the satin varnish, the two blacks may look exactly the same, but even if there's a slight glimmer of a difference, I'll be happy. The masking can come off now, and that's all I'll do with the airbrush for now. Ah yes, as I suspected, I've got a bit of overspray. No bother, I'll clean this up with a paintbrush. I'm going to start painting in the details now, and one that I didn't notice until looking at the photos is just how the edges of the cab sheets have been painted black. The other bits are the handmade details such as the lamp irons. I still can't remember what that bit's called. I'll continue to move around the body painting in the black details. Well, what I'm assuming are safety valves. I've also done some of the piping and the grab handles for the cab. A staple detail on 6 is the target on top. I took quite a bit of time doing this as I couldn't get the circle of white completely round and it annoyed me. So it was a balance of adding a little bit of white from the inside then a little bit of blue from the outside until it looked about right. The red centre was much easier to add, and it's basically just a knob in the middle. I used a pure red for this, and it's a good match for the transfers I've got for the roundels. I've made a little piece of pipework to go below the bunker, and this was just bent up using reference photos. I was going to just glue it in place, but in the end I drilled a hole in the bottom of the bunker to push fit the pipework into, so it won't get knocked off. A thicker wire was chosen to replicate the smokebox pipework. The sides of the smokebox does already have holes in, which is nice. I'll spray them black before I glue them in place. Now this is one of the pieces that came with the body, and no, I can't remember what it's called either. I've got a lot on my mind at the moment. Maybe it'll be a fun activity for you to go and find out, a bit like homework. Now this is another piece that I've made up. However, the body did have a hole in the cab front for this one, and it's been painted black and glued in place. The smokebox pipework is now getting glued in, and you can see how impatient I get, and I've glued it on before the black was fully dry, and it's just rubbed off. So I'll have to top that up with a brush when the glue's dry. Oh come on now, this isn't funny anymore. More pipework that I don't know the name of. There we go, all the parts that I've made up and have been sprayed black are now getting the top coat of matte black acrylic to blend it in with the smokebox. This is also going to help catch any black that I've rubbed off whilst gluing them on. That's enough black for now. Time for the gold and brassy colours to come up, and that will now go on the rest of the pipework. Again, always follow reference photos during your builds as much as you can, as it's really easy to get something wrong if you're winging it. The cab spectacles are also painted with the gold. Here I employ my technique of painting towards the outside rim of the spectacle plates, to minimise the risk of getting gold on the blue. The smokebox dart is painted with a metallic silver, though it will get dulled down with a satin varnish. The cab interior is next, and I hate this bit, I really hate it. The cream is a really weak colour, so it takes a good few coats to cover the blue. I'll also roughly paint in the rest of the details, such as the firebox, with black. When the roof's on and the crew are in the doorways, you'll do a really good job of actually seeing into the cab, so I'm not going to waste much time here. Which is a shame, because the details are really nice. Sorry, Alec. Right then, let's talk about transfers. In this livery, 6 has RAF roundels on the boiler, and little signs on the cab. I ended up getting a transfer chap to make them up out of actual waterslide transfers, as I was concerned how thick they'd look if I used any other method. They are also completely to scale, which I like. The benefit of waterslide transfers over dry rub is that you can adjust their position as many times as you need to. Of course, this does mean that you need to seal them in, or they'll just flake back off again, which I don't like. The chap who did these for me has done a fab job, and they have all the detail required, which is impressive because, as you can see, they're really tiny. I tend to use a cocktail stick to adjust their position, and this is because it's got a soft end. It won't scratch the paintwork or the transfer. When I'm happy with its position, I get a cotton bud to firmly press on the transfer, which will help absorb any water from underneath it, getting a good bond with the paint. The roundels look just as good, and I was quite relieved to see that the measurements I gave him worked out about right, and it fits nicely between the boiler bands. I did have to fight with these to get them to stick to the boiler, only because the boiler's round, and the edges of the transfer wanted to peel and sit flat. I did find a little bit of decal fix by Humbrol helped here. Well, that's the transfers on and fixed in place, onto the etch plates. These are from light railway stores, and look really good. However, due to the massive delivery times, you do need to order these as soon as you can. In fact, I've ordered them for all the TR stock, so they're ready when I need them. I spray these with a black rattle can, and if you're lucky, the black will pool inside the letters just like that. They can then be cut off and the edges tidied up. I cut these on a glass block as it's really easy to bend the plates if you cut them on a cutting mat. Oh god, she's back. Sorry, as I was saying. I used to use super glue, but as you need to get it absolutely right the first time, now I just used a few blobs of gluing glaze, which is really slow drying, thin and dries clear if it seeps out the sides. Then it's just a case of working through the set. I start with a nameplate and use that to set the others in place. You may need to remove a few rivets from the cab side, as I did find the larger plate wouldn't sit level with them underneath. The detail on the smaller plates doesn't really print, so I just randomly chose what looked right. It looks okay. I can finally spray the whole model with a satin varnish, which will dull down the shiny brass, as well as bring the uniform look that I want on all of the models running on this layout. With the varnish dry, I can now add the window glazing, and this is just some scrap clear plastic that came off some packaging. I chopped them to the size slightly larger than the window frame and applied glue and glaze around the rim. The glazing can now be popped on and pressed into the glue and glaze. The roof has been sprayed with black and it can go on as well. Obviously the roof is printed to complement the body, so it is a perfect fit. I only use a few tiny drops of super glue for this and the roof set in place. The cotton bud has served its job, so I can now snap it off the model. And finally marry it up with the chassis, which has had its wheels cleaned and things like that. The black coat has really altered the look of the chassis, and the fact it's the same black as the body means that it's all in sync, which helps make it look less like a model on a chassis and more like one model. I was done, but then I decided to add a light weather into it, so I whipped the chassis out one last time and went at the body with a black acrylic wash. It was important to get as much black off as I could before it started drying here, as it would change the finish if it was too dirty. I also used kitchen roll to absorb most of the water away again. The weathering only took about an hour to fully dry off, so the last thing to do here was to fill the bunker with coal. I say fill it up, this is running on Nant Gwernol, which is the end of the line, so I only really filled it about half full. I have no idea what coal this is, but it's almost like little broken up bits of black rubber. It's not real coal. I do have real coal, but I only use it for the soot. When I've got about the right amount of coal in the bunker, I seal in place with a ballast bond, and that's about the best method I've found. Well, that'll do for now. It's looking about right in my eyes, though obviously I don't know what couplings to use, as is tradition on this channel. I've also got a crew and lamps to paint up from Model U, which will really finish it off. I'm really happy with the transfers and the etch plates actually. The quality of these additional details really complement the fantastic job Westcliff Works have made with this model, and I can't wait to get it running on the layout. Like the coaches, if you want to get hold of one of these models, contact Alec at Westcliff Works. His website's not quite ready yet, so I've popped his email in the description below. Tell him I say hi. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, as I've got a taste for loco building now. And there's more where that came from. Cheers.